The Trump administration shifts tactics in Minneapolis, making nice with Governor Tim Walz, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, and moving Gregory Bovino of Border Patrol out of his position and Tom Homan in. Plus, Kanye West takes out a full-page ad apologizing for his anti-Semitism and Nazi support and blaming his bipolar disorder. We'll get into that first. If you're not a Daily Wire Plus member yet, now is the time to join. As a member, you get access to episodes 1 and 2 of the Pendragon cycle, Rise of the Merlin, the Daily Wire's premium 7-part cinematic series, 3 years in the making. Filmed across 2 continents, built for people who care about real values and real storytelling. You also get episode 1 of Matt Walsh's brand new series, Real History with Matt Walsh. And beyond entertainment, you get the news, the actual facts, the real story, plus opinions from the most trusted voices in conservative media, all of it ad-free and uncensored. Join right now at dailywireplus.com. Save 35% with code DW35. It appears that the Democrats' chaos attempt in Minneapolis has now borne fruit, and that is the result of legacy media coverage. Of course, it's also the result of a couple of tragic incidents, and it is indeed the result of mishandling of those tragic incidents by people inside the Trump administration. That combination meant that the chaos attempt by Democrats in Minneapolis has actually worked to some extent. It has now driven action by the Trump administration. The Trump administration yesterday announced that Gregory Bovino has essentially lost his job. Gregory Bovino is the Border Patrol chief, who is the commander at large and will return apparently to El Centro. Kristi Noem, who's the head of Department of Homeland Security, is also on thin ice at this point, given her mishandling of a couple of tragic cases in which American citizens were shot under disputed circumstances. One, Renee Good, was attempting to obstruct federal operations, and then she hit an agent with her car and was shot to death. And Alex Preddy, who was, again, obstructing federal operations, resisted arrest, and was disarmed, but apparently the officer still thought he was armed and shot him to death. The mishandling of those situations by both Gregory Bovino and Kristi Noem has put the administration in a particularly poor position. But let's not forget that this begins with Democrats attempting to obstruct federal law. And because Democrats have been obstructing federal law, because they've been attempting to dissuade the administration from enforcing the law, this has meant that the administration has been forced to actually change its tactics with regard to deportations in large measure. The Wall Street Journal has a really interesting and important piece today talking about the Trump mass deportation policy. So let's be real. The Trump mass deportation policy, which has been part of Trump's stump speech since 2015, has suggested that all illegal immigrants have to go. The reality is that Americans are much more focused when it comes to actual deportation from the United States of America. They're much more focused and much more on board with deportation of illegal immigrants who have committed independent crimes. They may be fine with the idea of mass deportation of people who are illegal immigrants but have committed no other crime aside from the illegal immigration. But the place they really want to focus, and the easy call for them, and the politically easy call, is the people who are committing and arson and assault and murder, right? Those are the people that the American people are positive they want to see gone. And early on, the administration did an amazing job of targeting specifically those people. And in red states, they are still targeting those people. The problem is that blue states have done a good job of not working with ICE and obstructing federal law enforcement. And that has meant that ICE has become more untargeted in its pursuit of criminal illegal aliens. So as the Wall Street Journal points out, at the beginning of 2025, 87% of ICE arrests were immigrants with either a prior conviction or a criminal charge pending, according to ICE data obtained by the Deportation Data Project. Only 13% of those arrested at the beginning of 2025 didn't have either a conviction or a pending charge. But the criminal share of apprehensions has declined as the months have gone on. By October 2025, the percentage of arrested immigrants with a prior conviction or criminal charge had fallen all the way down to 55%. That is a reflection of blue states not working with ICE, because one way you guarantee that people who have been arrested for criminal charges end up out of the country is when you don't have sanctuary states and sanctuary cities refusing to work with ICE and Border Patrol. Because if you work with ICE, then you pick somebody up for rape, you check their immigration status. If they are here illegally, you call up ICE and that person ends up being deported. If you don't work with ICE, maybe that person ends up in jail. Maybe that person ends up in the system and then is acquitted or is released for lack of evidence and ends up running around the countryside. And that's what's been happening in blue states. Since October, 73% taken into ICE custody had no criminal conviction. Only 5% had a violent criminal conviction, according to a Cato Institute review of ICE data. Now, again, what this means is that ICE, when it goes to actually try and do deportations, it ends up picking up people who may or may not have committed a crime, but fewer of them will have committed a separate crime than if they were just going into the jails. And this is the point that's been made by the White House border czar, Tom Homan. He said if they let us in their damn jail, we could arrest the bad guy in the safety and security of the jail. And what that also means is that when ICE does pursue a criminal illegal immigrant, they now have to go and knock down a door. They now have to go into a neighborhood in order to do all of that. Okay, this makes ICE confrontations more likely. It makes protests more plentiful. It means uglier pictures on your TV. And this is being facilitated and driven, again, by Democrat sanctuary city policies. But what that means is that also those ugly pictures on your TV change how people think of the issue in general. People like when the law is enforced. They like law and order. They just don't like to see law and order in progress. They don't like to see it happen. By the way, this is not just true for illegal immigration. This is true for normal police operations. Policing is a very messy and difficult job. This is why you will see many circumstances in which somebody takes a video of a police officer having to do his job, and the entire online crowd will jump on the police officer for having to do the kinds of stuff police officers have to do. Because pretty much every person who is dealing with a cop is experiencing the worst day of their life when they deal with the cop. And the cop all day long has to deal with people who are experiencing that. And so he is likely to encounter people in their most violent state. And that means that the pictures on your TV, when the stuff gets broadcast on your TV, is ugly. And just like everything else ugly in life, people don't like to see the ugliness. They just like to see the result, if the result is good. War, domestic law enforcement, all of these things, when people see ugly pictures on their TV, they get very, very upset, even though they want the results from the ugly pictures. And well, when those ugly pictures involve American citizens being killed under disputed circumstances, at the very best, very checkered circumstances for the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, when that happens, that allows legacy media actors to treat all of law enforcement as an exercise in brutal tyranny. If you want to see how legacy media are twisting this chaos operation into a story about the evils of ICE, all you have to do is look at Jimmy Kimmel. We'll get to that in a moment. First, it's sometimes difficult to get sleep. You know, there are a lot of stresses in life, but you need sleep if you're going to be there for your family, for your job, for all the things that are actually important. Well, that means you need the right mattress. And finding the right mattress doesn't have to be complicated. Our sponsor, Helix, actually makes it incredibly straightforward with their sleep quiz, which matches you to the perfect mattress based on your specific preferences and sleep needs. They're not just another mattress company either. Helix is the most awarded mattress brand out there with glowing reviews from major publications like Forbes and Wired. Folks, it's not just marketing hype. A study they conducted found that 82% of participants actually saw an increase in their deep sleep cycle while sleeping on a Helix mattress, which is pretty impressive when you think about how crucial quality sleep is for everything else in life. And I've got that Helix sleep mattress. I've had it for years. They personalized it for me. I have one for my parents, actually. They personalized it for my parents. It's very easy. You go and you take the quiz, and then you get a mattress delivered straight to your door, free shipping, 120-night sleep trial, so you can actually test it out in your own home, and they back everything up with that limited lifetime warranty. Start sleeping right tonight by ordering a Helix mattress today. Head on over to helixsleep.com/Ben for 20% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/Ben for 20% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name after checkout so they know we sent you. helixsleep.com/Ben. Also, there's a lot going on in life, and from time to time, you know, you may contemplate your own mortality. I know, dark thoughts here on a Tuesday, but the reality is that at some point, all of us will plot. So we got to make sure that our family is taken care of. And the best way to do that is life insurance. It's really important. I've spent a lot of time actually pondering this and then taking care of it. You should do the same, but you don't need to spend that much time, and you can make it easy and efficient with Policy Genius. It's an online marketplace where you can compare quotes from top insurers side by side, completely free. No jumping around between websites, no endless phone calls. What really stands out is their team actually works for you. They're licensed agents who help you figure out what you actually need, not what some company wants to sell you. They walk you through coverage amounts, prices, all of it. No guesswork, just straight answers. They handle the paperwork, answer your questions, and honestly, just take that weight off your shoulders. You get clarity on what you need and can move forward fast. With the new year coming up, it's the perfect time to lock this in and start 2025 with real peace of mind. Check out Policy Genius. They've got thousands of 5-star reviews from people who finally found the right policy for their needs. You'll thank yourself later. Plan the year knowing you've protected what you've built. With Policy Genius, real users have gotten 20-year, $2 million policies for just $53 a month. Head on over to policygenius.com/Shapiro to compare life insurance quotes from top companies. See how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/Shapiro. So just to take an example of this sort of propagandizing, Jimmy Kimmel did this last night. Here was Jimmy Kimmel going off on pretty much all ICE agents, all Border Patrol, and suggesting that they are masked thugs, terrorists roaming our streets. Here he was last night on ABC News.
I spent the weekend, like probably a lot of you did, looking at my phone and just feeling shocked and sick about what is happening in Minneapolis. These one video after another, screaming people being torn from their families, Americans, people who were born in the United States being pulled out of their cars for the crime of having an accent or whatever, children, small children, babies being tear gassed, taken into custody, separated from their parents. Just one atrocity after another being committed by this gang of poorly trained, shamefully led, mask-wearing goons. And that is what they are. They're goons committing vile, heartless, and even criminal acts. And it's sickening to watch, and it's frustrating to watch. It's like we're all being forced to play a game that has no rules. They just make up the rules as they go along.
When you hear Kimmel label our law enforcement, they are ours, right? I mean, we pay their salaries, as jackbooted thugs, masked thugs, who are out there pursuing atrocities against Americans. That is the story that the left would like to tell. And they've facilitated that story by obstructing federal law enforcement. This is the game. This is the game. And then Kimmel goes on to lie about the circumstances under which, for example, Renee Good was shot.
They won't even admit that it was a mistake. They say the Honda SUV Renee Good was driving was weaponized. They say the gun Alex Preddy had a license to carry in an open carry state. All right, many of these same people screamed very loudly about when it was Kyle Rittenhouse carrying the gun, a gun that Alex Preddy did not even draw, did not touch, a gun that was taken from him by one of the agents before he was shot dead by the other ones. They fired 10 times on an ICU nurse. They're telling us, well, it was justified, you know? Is that the law and order that you voted for if you voted for this?
Notice what he's doing there. So he takes some facts and then he wraps a giant fiction around it. Okay, so it is true that Renee Good, they claimed that she was a domestic terrorist, DHS. It's true they did the same thing with Alex Preddy. This is why I said at the very top that failures inside the Trump administration have made Democrats' job easier for them in order to shut down law and order. But notice how he wraps that into a generalized critique of all law and order in the United States and the suggestion that the only possible solution is to simply allow our immigration law to go unenforced.
My wife and I have family in Minneapolis. They're afraid to take their kids to school. They're afraid to go to work. And I can only imagine how people who aren't white feel about this. How does this end? What's the plan here? Is the plan to just keep doing this in every city that didn't vote for Donald Trump? Does anyone on any side believe this is good leadership?
What he is doing there is also a lie, right? This is only happening in blue cities because blue cities are the places that are not working with ICE. Red cities are working with ICE, so it's not a problem. Blue cities are not working with ICE, so it is a problem. Okay, now, this is all incredibly frustrating to watch if you are attempting to be objective-minded about the very difficult realities of enforcing the law, and you recognize that there has been a mechanism set up by blue states in order to obstruct the enforcement of that federal law, and that the people attempting to enforce that law are then blamed when things go wrong. It's deeply, deeply frustrating. The problem is that frustration does not change the facts with regard to public opinion. When it comes to public opinion, because of the ugly pictures on the TV, as I warned last week, when you look at those ugly pictures on your TV, opinions on whether people want to see the operations continue drop. So CNN's Harry Enton looked at this. He says, this is turning into a political disaster area for President Trump.
ICE, DHS, Kristi Noem have been a political disaster because just take a look here. I mean, ICE's net approval rating during Trump's term. You go back to term number one. Look, it's pretty even at 0 points. You go to June 2025, right? That was when all that stuff was going on in Los Angeles. They dropped down. Look at this, minus 17 points, way in the basement. But then after Minneapolis, it's even lower, minus 27 points on the net approval rating of ICE. Of course, this all being done under Kristi Noem. So, no, what's going on in Minneapolis is not popular at all. What's been going on during this second term under ICE, under the Trump administration, under Kristi Noem, has very much not been popular, and it's only been getting more and more unpopular.
Okay, so this is why yesterday the Trump administration attempted to change course. The way they attempted to change course is by honestly assessing what has been going on, recognizing that there are people attempting to obstruct the law, and also attempting to change some of the staffing decisions that they have made with regard to who heads up very contentious efforts. And these are the right moves by the Trump administration. I encouraged them to do this actually yesterday on the show. So yesterday, Caroline Leavitt was asked about Alex Preddy because obviously Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem had suggested he was a domestic terrorist who was attempting to inflict mass casualties. The same line was trotted out by Gregory Bavino, who is the official in charge of Border Patrol agents in Minneapolis. President Trump was asked about that earlier in the day yesterday, and he refused to give a green light to that description. And so Caroline Leavitt over at the White House did the same.
On Stephen Miller's comments, will Stephen Miller be apologising to the family of Alex Pretty for calling him, quotes, an assassin who tried to murder federal agents, despite the fact that, as you say, this is still under investigation?
Look, again, this incident remains under investigation, and nobody here at the White House, including the President of the United States, wants to see Americans hurt or killed and losing their lives in American streets. And we mourn for the parents. As a mother myself, of course, I cannot imagine the loss of life, especially losing one's child. And that same empathy from the president goes for the parents of angel families, parents of victims of illegal alien crime across our country as well. And that's exactly why the president continues to be wholeheartedly committed to deporting the worst of the worst criminals from our country.
Okay, but the thing she doesn't do there is defend Stephen Miller's language in calling Alex Preddy a potential assassin, or the language of Gregory Bavino, or the language of Kristi Noem. And then she says what is obviously true. Obeying law enforcement used to be a sort of normally accepted part of American life. This is true, of course.
They have also used their platforms to encourage left-wing agitators to stalk, record, confront, and obstruct federal officers who are just trying to lawfully perform their duties, which has created dangerous situations threatening both these officers and the general public and Minnesotans alike. This is precisely what unfolded in Minneapolis on Saturday morning. Obstructing federal law enforcement and inciting violence against officers is wrong and illegal. This used to be a universally accepted position in the United States.
So, of course, that is true. And then she added that President Trump is fulfilling the will of the people when it comes to deporting criminal illegal immigrants. Again, notice the focus. Criminal illegal immigrants who have committed another crime.
As the duly elected president, the president is fulfilling the will of the people by arresting and removing these threats from our country in cities from Los Angeles to New York and, yes, Minneapolis. Yet Democrat leaders in Minnesota with sanctuary city policies have actively defied federal immigration law and the will of the people. And as a result of that defiance, 2 Minnesotans have now tragically lost their lives on the streets.
Okay, again, this description is how the Trump administration should have been covering this in the first place. And then she laid out President Trump's path to restoring order in Minneapolis, all of which is the policy that should be followed.
And he has outlined a clear and simple path to restoring law and order in Minnesota. Number 1, Governor Walz, Mayor Frey, and all Democrat leaders should turn over all criminal illegal aliens currently incarcerated in their prisons and jails to federal authorities, along with any illegal aliens with active warrants or known criminal histories for immediate deportation. Number 2, state and local law enforcement must agree to turn over all illegal aliens who are arrested by local police. And then thirdly, local police must assist federal law enforcement in apprehending and detaining illegal aliens who are wanted for crimes, especially violent crimes. If Governor Walz and Mayor Frey implement these common sense cooperative measures that I will add have already been implemented in nearly every single other state across the country, Customs and Border Patrol will not be needed to support ICE on the ground in Minnesota. ICE and local law enforcement can peacefully work together, as they are effectively doing in so many other states and jurisdictions. Additionally, President Trump is calling on the United States Congress to immediately pass legislation ending sanctuary cities once and for all.
Hey, this is good policy, and this is the policy the Trump administration should be pursuing. They're also, again, changing some of the personnel who are in charge of implementing this policy. Instead of essentially leaving this in the hands of Kristi Noem over at DHS, who I think has not done a good job, as I've made clear over and over, or Gregory Bavino, who seems to not be PR wise or capable of handling difficult situations like this. He is sending the person who should have been in charge all along, the border czar, Tom Homan, who since the beginning of this has been the law and order, let the full investigations take place, we're enforcing the law guy. Tom Homan has always been the adult in the room on this policy. According to the Washington Post, Caroline Leavitt said that Trump maintains full confidence in Kristi Noem, but he is sending Tom Homan to Minneapolis, and Homan will report directly to the president. He is taking over from Greg Bavino, the Border Patrol commander, who's been the face of the operation in Minneapolis, as well as previous forays into LA and Chicago. Leavitt said that Bavino will continue to lead operations around the country, but this is pretty clearly a demotion. According to The Atlantic, Gregory Bavino has been removed from his role as Border Patrol commander at large and will instead return to his former job in El Centro, California, and he is expected to retire soon. That's according to The Atlantic. Again, kind of disputed reports from the Trump administration on all of that. Now, this also comes amid President Trump changing some of his language with regard to, for example, Tim Walz. So yesterday, the president put up a statement on Truth Social, quote, Governor Tim Walz called me with the request to work together with respect to Minnesota. It was a very good call, and we actually seem to be on a similar wavelength. I told Governor Walz I would have Tom Homan call him, and that what we're looking for are any and all criminals that they have in their possession. The governor very respectfully understood that, and I was speaking to him in the near future. He was happy that Tom Homan was going to Minnesota, and so am I. We have had such tremendous success in Washington, D.C., Memphis, Tennessee, and New Orleans, Louisiana, and virtually every other place that we have touched. And even in Minnesota, crime is way down, but both Governor Walz and I want to make it better. President Trump. So that is President Trump being conciliatory toward Governor Walz. Now, yesterday on the show, I recommended that actually he throw the issue in Walz's lap and say, listen, it's our job to enforce federal immigration law. You tell us what we have to do and what you have to do to make sure that federal immigration law is enforced in the most efficient possible way, since you seem to think that you can both obstruct federal law enforcement and encourage people to obstruct federal law enforcement. The president seems to think that he is going to win over Walz and Democrats more with honey than with vinegar, which is a fair approach. The president then made a similar statement with regard to Jacob Frey of Minneapolis. Quote, I just had a very good telephone conversation with Mayor Jacob Frey of Minneapolis. Lots of progress is being made. Tom Homan will be meeting with him tomorrow in order to continue the discussion. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Well, Tim Walz, for his part, then put out a statement afterward in which he said, quote, Governor Walz had a productive call with President Trump earlier today. The governor made the case that we need impartial investigations of the Minneapolis shootings involving federal agents and that we need to reduce the number of federal agents in Minnesota. The president agreed he would talk to his Department of Homeland Security about ensuring the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension is able to conduct an independent investigation as would ordinarily be the case. The president also agreed to look into reducing the number of federal agents in Minnesota and working with the state in a more coordinated fashion on immigration enforcement regarding violent criminals. The governor reminded President Trump the Minnesota Department of Corrections already honors federal detainers by notifying ICE when a person committed to its custody isn't a U.S. citizen. There's not a single documented case of the department's releasing someone from state prison without offering to ensure a smooth transfer of custody. Now, in a second, we'll get to the lie that is inherent there, because there is a lie that is being told by omission in that statement by Governor Walz. But clearly, what is happening here is the Trump administration is reorienting toward the better parts of the administration in terms of handling this and trying to de-escalate the situation. Whether that de-escalation is possible is going to be at least in large part up to the state of Minnesota and the city of Minneapolis. With that said, the Trump administration is doing the right thing by handing more power over to Tom Homan inside the administration. Apparently, this has been a battle brewing internally inside the administration for quite a while. According to Jenny Taylor, reporting for our Daily Wire, there have been dividing lines drawn inside the administration already. On one side, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, Border Patrol Commander Greg Bavino, and Corey Lewandowski, a top Trump advisor and temporary government employee who has had a long rumored relationship, allegedly, with Kristi Noem. On the other side, our border czar Tom Homan and acting ICE Director Todd Lyons. Noem's camp is focused on aggressive and showy tactics, fiery press conferences, and Bavino marching through town with a squad of Border Patrol agents in tow, and is fixated on increasing arrest numbers. Homan's side is focused on the quality of arrests and getting the worst criminals off the street, which they feel is a job best suited for ICE rather than Border Patrol. And again, that split into the open when Noem and Bavino started making statements that were not backed by the facts with regard to the killings of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. Officials inside Noem's own department slammed her rush to judgment, according to sources who spoke with the Daily Wire. One official said it was a horrible response. Many people I've heard say it was unprofessional. She doesn't know what she's doing. The people in DHS are frustrated with Secretary Noem and the way DHS is handling the media. The employees want a more professional response, not memes and one-liners. So I highly doubt that the changes at the top of DHS have stopped. It seems to me that Kristi Noem's in a very vulnerable position, given her failures on this topic, among others. And frankly, I think that that's appropriate. I think that she has not done a credit to the president as DHS secretary, which is her job. If you're a secretary working under the president, at the pleasure of the president, then you really should be facilitating the success of his administration, not undermining it with photo ops and bad statements. Noem, for her part, seems to be giving up the ghost to Homan. She said on X Monday, it's good news for peace, safety, and accountability in Minnesota that Homan is going to Minneapolis. Quote, I've worked closely with Tom over the last year. He's been a major asset to our team. His experience and insight will help us in our wide-scale fraud investigations, which have robbed Americans, and will help us to remove even more public safety threats and violent criminal illegal aliens off the streets of Minneapolis. We continue to call on the leadership in Minnesota to allow for state and local partnership in our public safety mission. So, again, we'll have to see how far the fallout goes. House Democrats are looking at Kristi Noem for possible impeachment. Apparently, they are set to open an investigation as early as next week. Democrats are going to conduct their investigation, according to the Washington Post, without the majority party. They acknowledge they're unlikely to remove Noem in the short term, but they want to signal, obviously, to their own constituents that they are taking the problems with Noem and with DHS and with this entire illegal immigration cleanup operation seriously. Which brings us to the Democrats. So Democrats are clearly sensing blood in the water here. They clearly sense momentum. They do, which is why this entire chaos operation run by the Democrats is a disaster area. If you can politically win by obstructing federal law, that is a massive problem. It's a massive problem. And it's why the president is right to seek conciliation, but obviously conciliation with red lines. Federal law must be enforced. And if the state of Minnesota and the city of Minneapolis refuse to allow the enforcement of actual federal law, then we have an impasse. I think the president is right to replace Noem with Homan in this position. Homan, again, is the adult in the room. And I think that the president is not wrong to reach out to Walz, but I think that has to be the predicate to an actual conversation with Walz, because Walz is fibbing now. So Walz put out an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal in which he suggested federal officials are lying. He said the Trump administration's assault on Minnesota long ago stopped being a matter of immigration enforcement. It is a campaign of organized brutality against the people of our state. It isn't just, it isn't legal, and critically, it isn't making anyone safer. Okay, now again, the notion this is a campaign of organized brutality against all the people of Minnesota is a lie. It is untrue. And this sort of posturing from Walz is utterly inappropriate. Utterly inappropriate. Immigration law is enforced or should be enforced. There's a duty to enforce it under the law by every executive branch head. Every president has a duty to enforce immigration law. Just because Joe Biden refused to do it doesn't mean he didn't have a duty to do it. Donald Trump is doing the thing that all these other presidents said they were going to do. And it is, in fact, the job of state and local officials not to get in the way. So what Homan does, he says that he's working with the feds, but he isn't really. He isn't really, because there is a fundamental lie that is being told here. So Walz says the pretext for all this is the Trump administration's insistence that our immigration laws would otherwise go unenforced. This federal occupation of Minnesota is, administration officials insist, about our predilection for releasing violent criminal illegal aliens from state custody. I can't stress this enough. The Trump administration has its facts wrong about Minnesota. And then Walz claims, the administration claims that Minnesota jails release the worst of the worst. In reality, the Minnesota Department of Corrections honors all federal and local detainers by notifying ICE when a person committed to its custody isn't a U.S. citizen. There's not a single documented case of the department releasing someone from state prison without offering to ensure a smooth transfer of custody. Yet the lies persist. This week, ICE tweeted that rural Cottonwood County had refused to honor a detainer for an alleged child. That's not true. The county sheriff followed procedure and contacted ICE when the subject posted bail, but ICE agents were too busy wreaking havoc in the Twin Cities to do their actual job and pick the prisoner up. Some of the administration's claims are ridiculous on their face. For example, it claims 1,360 non-U.S. citizens are in Minnesota prisons. The truth, our total state population in the prisons is roughly 8,000. Only 207 of them are non-citizens. And then the administration, he says, published what it claimed was a list of people who have been arrested as part of the ICE sweep, asserting this list represents the worst of the worst criminals, implying we have been protecting them from capture. Minnesota Public Radio investigated and found most had been transferred to ICE custody at the end of their time served in Minnesota prisons. And then he says, everyone wants to see our immigration laws enforced. This isn't what's happening in Minnesota. Okay, so here is the problem. Here is the lie. Yes, it is true that Minnesota on the state level, the State Department of Corrections honors ICE detainers. But you know who doesn't in Minnesota? City and county jails. They do not honor ICE detainers. So, in effect, Walz is pointing out that if you go to prison having committed a crime and being convicted, then they will honor an ICE detainer. But if they pick you up for sexual assault before you've gone through all of the rigmarole of a trial, they will not notify ICE. If they pick you up for an alleged, ICE is not notified. And so unless the case goes all the way through to conviction and then time in the jail system, ICE is not notified. Well, there are an awful lot of people who have experiences with law enforcement who don't end up going to jail, who ends up with traffic violations, multiple traffic violations. This is why you'll see people with a record as long as your arm who've been picked up by the police over and over and over, who never ended up in the State Department of Corrections. They never went to actual prison. They were in jail temporarily, and then they posted bail, or they were released, or whatever it is. That is a much larger number than the number of people who end up in the State Department of Corrections. President Trump and ICE are asking for people to work with ICE to allow for the deportation of migrants who are arrested for crimes. According to CBS News, the jurisdictions of Minneapolis and St. Paul will not hold someone for ICE because they say they lack the legal authority to detain people on ICE detainers, which are administrative warrants, not judicial warrants. But that's not true. It happens all over the country. Not only that, the Minnesota Secretary of State, Steve Simon, according to care11.com, has refused all requests for driver records, Medicaid data at voter rolls, citing privacy laws. So they're attempting to block fraud investigations, for example, into illegal immigrants. Meanwhile, Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of the state, wrote that DHS's operations in Minnesota were, quote, a federal invasion, and cited the administration's fraud claims as a pretext for political targeting because of the viewpoints of the state's leaders. So Walz is attempting to kind of, edge around the reality of the situation. And this is an issue that came up when I was talking with Governor Gavin Newsom of California. He made the same claim. Oh, no, we work with ICE all the time. Well, then what is the point of you being a sanctuary state? What does that designation mean? And the answer is, what the designation means is that they will not work with ICE unless the person is full on in the Department of Corrections. That's what it means. And sanctuary cities will not allow, for example, their police departments to gather immigration data on the people that they arrest, which is a massive problem. It is a huge, huge problem. And it means that people who are repeat criminals are in fact being allowed back onto the streets if they don't do actual hard prison time. If there's a plea agreement that ends with house arrest, or if there is some sort of fine that is paid, those people just end up back on the streets and ICE is never notified. So this is where the Trump administration is going to have to be careful. Now, maybe they go for the titular victory here. Maybe they say, well, Tim Walz has given up the ghost. He's no longer going to pursue his sanctuary state policies with such alacrity. We seem to have come to an agreement. They look for an off-ramp. That's possible politically here. But again, if the message that comes out of this for Democrats is obstruct federal law and get away with it, that is going to be a massive problem. And by the way, that does seem to be what Democrats are aiming for. So it's quite possible here that Democrats win the battle but lose the war, meaning that if they win the battle against ICE, if they get Americans to briefly see ICE as the problem and illegal immigration as a secondary issue, if they get all of that to happen in the short term, that may not be the result in the long term. We saw the same exact thing happen in 2020 when the police briefly were treated as an invading army by the Democrats. And for a moment, the police were wildly unpopular. And then it turns out that when you do that, crime rates radically skyrocket and people get mad. And then they don't like the Democrats for that, which is why the Democrats have been underwater on the immigration issue and also on policing for years on end. So Democrats theoretically here could win the battle against the Trump administration in Minneapolis, but lose the war politically. So again, Democrats seem to want to take this too far. As always, when the pendulum swings, it always swings too far in one direction. Ro Khanna, who wants to run for president for some odd reason, the Democrat from California, he was out there on the streets of Minneapolis pandering.
The New York Post is saying this has gone too far. It's gone too far.
It's definitely gone too far.
They're killing American citizens. I mean, no one signed up for this. No one who voted for him thought they would be killing a 37-year-old American nurse.
It's tiresome. Again, this is what's so annoying about this situation. Many things can be true at once. The Trump administration is right to want to enforce the law. The Secretary of Homeland Security and the Border Patrol chief botched the handling of bad situations. Democrats have set up a chaos operation to obstruct federal law, and our legacy media and Democratic politicians are attempting to facilitate the obstruction of federal law. Like, all those things can be true at once, and also it can be politically advantageous for Democrats. I wish that weren't true. All of that is true. But are Democrats going to go too far? Probably. The only sane Democrat, again, is John Fetterman. Again, I don't agree with Senator Fetterman when Fetterman says that the operations in Minneapolis should end, but he also opposes, for example, a government shutdown over ICE. He put out a statement saying the operation in Minneapolis should stand down and immediately end. It has become an ungovernable and dangerous urban theater for civilians and law enforcement that is incompatible with the American spirit. He says, I believe our nation deserves a secured border and that we should also deport all criminal migrants. I believe there needs to be a path to citizenship. But then he says, I will never vote to shut our government down. And he says, a vote to shut our government down will not defund ICE. DHS already has $178 billion in funding from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which I did not vote for. I want a conversation on the DHS appropriations bill and support stripping it from the minibus. It is unlikely that that will happen, and our country will instead suffer another shutdown. So again, Fetterman is trying to sort of have the baby here. That is the I think most sane Democrat position that I've seen articulated, although obviously I disagree that, quote unquote, all operations should end in Minnesota. That's just nullification of federal law. Many more Democrats are going way further than Senator Fetterman. So Governor Wes Moore, who wants to run for president despite all of his protestations to the contrary, the governor of Maryland, he supports a government shutdown over ICE funding.
The idea that we should have a government shut down, it hurts my state more than any state in the country. But I also know this. We cannot continue to allow this funding of the 13th largest military force by funding in the world to continue to exist.
And meanwhile, Senator Chris Van Hollen says the real domestic terrorists are in the White House.
This has become part of the disgusting White House cover-up of these killings. They said the same thing about Renee Good. They really think the American people are stupid. I mean, we can all see the videotapes. We saw the videotapes with Renee Good. We've seen the videotape today with Alex Preddy. It is clear that Stephen Miller and this White House are engaged in a cover-up, and it's criminal to try to cover up a killing like this. Look, the reality is that the real domestic terrorists, they're in the White House right now. They're people like Stephen Miller. They're people like Donald Trump. They're the ones who are terrorizing these communities, having nothing to do with public safety.
That's Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, who is indeed a stupid person. He is the same person who went down to El Salvador to visit with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, as you recall, a man who was deported, having allegedly committed a wide variety of crimes, including domestic violence against his spouse. So that is Chris Van Hollen. Again, Democrats are going to go too far in this direction. That is very, very likely. Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, she, of course, is going the furthest of anyone. She says ICE is beyond reform. She put out a tweet, voting no on the DHS funding bill is the bare minimum. Backing Kristi Noem's impeachment is the bare minimum. Holding law-breaking ICE agents legally accountable is the bare minimum. ICE is beyond reform. Abolish it, right? So some Democrats, the most radical Democrats, are going all the way here. Are Democrats going to follow that path, the sort of Zoran Mamdanification of their party? I think it's unlikely. Instead, Democrats seem to be coalescing around a set of demands for the funding of DHS. According to Axios, when Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer returns to Washington this week, he will have a growing block of Democrats demanding significant concessions from President Trump. A group of around 10 Senate Democrats is coalescing around a list of demands for changes at DHS, including requiring warrants for arrests, I assume they mean judicial warrants, not administrative warrants, and mandating that federal agents identify themselves. Multiple sources said they also want to demand that DHS cooperate with state and local investigations into incidents like the shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy in Minnesota. Some moderate Democrats might not be willing to go that far. Presumably that would be Senator Fetterman, for example, who doesn't want a government shutdown. So be interesting to see the Democrats fight it out over what is, quote unquote, enough for their base on this subject. It is quite possible, as I said, again, that Democrats are going to win the battle in Minneapolis, but lose the war as Americans actually reject their anti-law and order positioning in general, because there are lots of ugly pictures coming out of Minneapolis, and they're not all about ICE or Border Patrol. Yesterday, local PD had to arrest protesters at a hotel who decided that they were going to vandalize the hotel, break in, harass people.
You piece of freedom of speech, right? And that's the law.
People being arrested. Again, this is local PD. It's Minneapolis PD arresting people. I will say that one thing that we are watching across the country is a bored society, a truly bored society with a lot of young people with not enough to do who are spending their days fulminating about basic law enforcement operations and deciding that heroism requires that they stand up in the streets against the allegedly jackbooted thugs. And Democrats facilitating that sort of stuff will end in more violence. It just will. That is the reality. The sort of unhinged language that's being used about law enforcement will end with more confrontations. It will end with more death. And I do not think that is going to end with the Tom Homan deployment to Minnesota, so long as Democrats see the political gain in attempting to radicalize an entire youth population against law enforcement. Okay, meanwhile, in cultural news, Kanye West has now apologized for his anti-Semitism in a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal. He basically says what we all suspected about Kanye, and some of us were ripped up and down for saying it at the time, which is that he suffers from bipolar disorder. And because he's bipolar, he says crazy things. And when he's on a manic high, he says things and he can't be stopped. This has always been my take on Kanye West's anti-Semitism. It doesn't justify the anti-Semitism, but his anti-Semitism and his craziness is significantly more justifiable than that of his sane followers, people who are not bipolar, who have decided to follow him down that primrose path because they see the clicks and the giggles and all of it. Again, whether you choose to forgive somebody for their actions or not is up to you. Certainly, I've always felt that Kanye West's mental illness, knowing people who are schizophrenic, knowing people who are bipolar, when people are in the throes of this mental illness, they say and do things that are truly unjustifiable, even by them. That is just a reality of life. And recognizing that truth doesn't obviate fighting anti-Semitism, obviously. But again, I actually blame Kanye West a lot less than all the people who decided to host him on their podcast and treat him as a sane and rational human being, or chop out sections of his schizophrenic nonsense in order to make him appear more rational to a broader population, so that when he actually started spewing his Nazi trash, this suddenly seemed legitimate alongside all of his other commentary. Or all the people who decided that he had now opened the Overton window to Nazism enough that they were then going to capitalize. I blame those people much more than I blame a bipolar man who has always suffered with significant psychic breaks. Again, I think Kanye is less to blame for this than a lot of the people surrounding Kanye, for sure, who continued to make money off of him and make clicks off of him and all of the rest. His statement in the Wall Street Journal, he says, bipolar disorder comes with its own defense system, denial. When you're manic, you don't think you're sick. You think everyone else is overreacting. You feel like you're seeing the world more clearly than ever, when in reality, you're losing your grip entirely. Once people label you as crazy, you feel as if you cannot contribute anything meaningful to the world. It's easy for people to joke and laugh it off, when in fact it's a very serious, debilitating disease you can die from. According to the WHO and Cambridge University, people with bipolar disorder have a life expectancy shortened by 10 to 15 years on average, and a 2 to 3 times higher all-cause mortality rate than the general population. So the scariest thing about this disorder is how persuasive it is when it tells you you don't need help. It makes you blind, but you're convinced you have insight. You feel powerful, certain, and unstoppable. I lost touch with reality. Things got worse the longer I ignored the problem. I said and did things I deeply regret. Some of the people I love the most, I treated the worst. You endured fear, confusion, humiliation, and the exhaustion of trying to love someone who was at times unrecognizable. Looking back, I became detached from my true self. In that fractured state, I gravitated toward the most destructive symbol I could find, the swastika, and even sold t-shirts bearing it. One of the difficult aspects of having bipolar type 1 are the disconnected moments, many of which I still cannot recall, that lead to poor judgment and reckless behavior that oftentimes feels like an out-of-body experience. I regret and am deeply mortified by my actions in that state, and am committed to accountability, treatment, and meaningful change. It does not excuse what I did, though. I'm not a Nazi or an anti-Semite. I love Jewish people. Again, bipolar people are bipolar, and recognizing that reality means that, yes, we should have sympathy for them. I have zero sympathy for the people who decided that the worst excesses in which Kanye West was engaging were somehow justifiable or good or brilliant insights. Those people being sane, cynical, and disgusting. That's the part that is truly egregious and unforgivable. Not the ramblings of somebody who clearly has a mental disorder and who has admitted as much. Some of us said this at the time, several years ago, I will point out. And meanwhile, speaking of people who are unhinged, but not crazy, just politically unhinged, I don't know why Democrats have decided that their response to Joe Rogan is an obnoxious white lady who just says crazy shit. It's confusing to me. So Jennifer Welch is apparently the hot new thing, I guess. And how old is Jennifer Welch? I don't think that any of those descriptors actually apply. In any case, Here she was yesterday suggesting that white evangelical Christianity is a cancer.
White evangelical Christianity is a cancer. These are the worst of our country. These are the worst people in our country because they use their religion in two ways, as a weapon and as a shield. They weaponize it whenever they want to and say, we're on the moral high ground. You're a lesbian. You deserve to die. You're a lesbian. The cops shouldn't have revived you. Oh, your parents are Mexicans and they brought you over here. Yeah, you should go to jail and eat worm food. And then when you call them out on it, oh my God, they're after the Christians. How dare they? How dare they? We're so oppressed. White Christians are so oppressed in this country.
God, these obnoxious. Okay, this is a great way to win back men. Great job, Democrats. Really excellent stuff. That seems very, very rational and well articulated. If this is the direction Democrats want to go, if this is their response, which is to, I guess, drive harder into the wine non-moms with this sort of appeal, good luck to them. Okay, on the economic front, meanwhile, it turns out that Obamacare is a giant fail. So a brand new article from the Wall Street Journal points out that Obamacare has actually now started to cost people more than their mortgage. According to the Wall Street Journal, millions of Americans are starting to see their monthly health insurance bills rise, a new pressure point for a nation still frustrated with the high cost of living. Expanded subsidies, again, for Obamacare expired on December 31st. Now those newly calculated insurance bills are coming due. Americans are having to figure out how to pay up or go without. So Lenny and Mandy Wilson, who are 47 and live in Charleston, West Virginia, paid $255 a month last year for a low-end ACA plan. Last year, they learned their bill would be going up to $2,155 a month. That is a sum nearly triple their monthly mortgage payment. So great job, Obamacare, again, which continues to have to survive on the basis of federal subsidies and taxpayer dollars, gigantic infusions of taxpayer dollars. Now, will that blow back on Republicans? Again, this is the beauty of Democratic programs. When you fail, you simply blame lack of spending on the Republicans, which is why you've seen some Republicans in moderate states call for a temporary revision of the subsidies, at least for a year or two, while other measures are implemented that bring down costs. That's sort of the transitional plan here. Suffice it to say, as always, Democratic subsidized programs end up costing people a gigantic sum of money, and the only way out of it is further subsidization. That is the only way. No wonder, then, that voters feel less and less secure. According to a brand new New York Times Siena poll, asked what they feel is affordable, it's sort of fascinating. All of the areas that are most subsidized by the government are the areas that are least affordable, according to Americans. That is not a coincidence, because every area of American life subsidized by the government, the price has gone up radically. Education, 58% say unaffordable. Housing, largely subsidized by the government, 54% say unaffordable. Healthcare, subsidized by the government, 47% say unaffordable. When you get to, say, groceries, 28% say unaffordable, which, again, groceries are up because of inflation. But groceries are plentiful and you can still get them. And again, compared to the sort of cost of food historically, you can get a lot, even though the prices are really, really inflated. Transportation, 22% say unaffordable, as opposed to 47% who say somewhat affordable and 28% who say mostly affordable. So the pressures are all in the areas that the government has stuck its grubby fingers into. And the Democratic solution, as always, and this is the mistake that you see Republicans making too, is that government solves that problem. Government does not solve that problem. Government creates that problem. Have a transitional plan and get the government out of these programs. A transitional plan for the people who are in trouble and the people who are reliant on the subsidies, and then create better incentive structures, because capitalism makes things more plentiful and cheaper, and government subsidization makes things more scarce and more expensive. All right, folks, coming up, we'll get into the great California wealth exodus, people leaving California because of all of the bad policy over there. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us. An American citizen is shot by Border Patrol agents in Minneapolis in another disputed circumstance, and all hell breaks loose in Minneapolis. We'll break all of it down, why this is being driven by Democrats, what Republicans should do about it, how federal law enforcement should deal with all of this. It's a mess. First, if you're not a Daily Wire Plus member yet, now would be the time to join. As a member, you get episodes 1 and 2 of the Pendragon Cycle Rise of the Merlin, a premium cinematic series, 3 years in the making, filmed across 2 continents, built for people who care about real values and real storytelling. You also get episode 1 of Matt Walsh's brand new series, Real History with Matt Walsh. And beyond entertainment, you get the news, the actual facts, the real story, plus opinions from the most trusted voices in conservative media, all of it ad-free and uncensored. Join now at dailywireplus.com. Save 35% with code DW35. All hell has now broken loose in Minneapolis after another shooting involving federal officers and a person who is attempting to interfere with them in their pursuit of their legal duty. That person's name was Alex Preddy. According to NBC News, a federal immigration agent shot and killed the 37-year-old Minneapolis man on Saturday. This, of course, is the second shooting after the shooting of Renee Good, who was the woman who attempted to obstruct federal law enforcement and then hit an agent with her car before being shot. The man, again, identified by family as Alex Preddy, was an intensive care nurse. The circumstances around his final moments were caught on multiple angles on video. We're going to go through all of the details and try to determine culpability, legal and moral. We're also going to go through why it is that the left continues to ramp up this chaos. They are doing this on purpose. There is no question this is a purposeful attempt to undermine federal law enforcement in their pursuit of duty. And if that ends with ugly images on TV, that is the thing they want. They want the ugly images on the TV. They are desperate for the ugly images on the TV because they believe that that is going to undermine the Trump administration's immigration program and the Trump administration itself. That is why they are doing this. Let us be very clear. There are more people being deported from red states than from blue states right now, but you're not seeing these ugly images happening in red states. Why? The answer is because red states are helping to facilitate the deportation of people who should not be here. Red states are helping to ensure that criminal illegal immigrants are not in the system. And when they arrest somebody for a crime and that person is an illegal immigrant, they then tell federal law enforcement, federal authorities, ICE and Border Patrol, so the person can be deported. Blue states, sanctuary cities, sanctuary states are not doing that. That is what necessitates more boots on the ground from the federal government in these areas. And then local and state politicians have been going out there and suggesting that this amounts to a Gestapo-like occupation. They've been driving their own supporters out into the streets. Some of those supporters are then obstructing federal law enforcement, committing federal crimes. When that happens, the likelihood of terrible incidents goes way up. That is the simple logic, and that appears to be something that left-wing politicians want, that they are desperate for. It appears to be something they think they can run on, that if they put ugly images on your TV of immigration agents in confrontations with Americans, and if some of those incidents end with death, then that means they will be able to undermine their political opposition. And that is despicable. It truly is. Because again, we should all, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, be in favor of criminal illegal immigrants going home, not being in the United States. This is not a controversial issue. That right there is not a controversial issue. The necessity for larger federal presence, for harder implementation measures, is only being made necessary because there are Democratic politicians, members of the legacy media, who have decided to ramp all of this up and to facilitate the chaos. This is indeed planned. That is a reality. So that ends with bad situations. And we've been saying this for months, that if you have the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, coming out and saying that ICE agents are like the Gestapo or like the KKK, that if you have Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey saying the same, if you have all Democratic politicians suggesting that protesting ICE agents is not only a decent thing to do, but a positive and good thing to do. And then treating obstruction of federal law enforcement officers as a form of legitimate protest, which is the gray line they always seem to blur. If you do that, you will end up with more confrontations, more violence, and more possible deaths under disputed circumstances. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, this episode is sponsored by our friends over at Pure Talk. If your credit card balance is stressing you out after all the holiday spending, I have something that can save you money right now. You can cut your cell phone bill in half by switching to Pure Talk's Saver Plan. Just $20 a month for unlimited talk, text, 3 gigs of high-speed data on Pure Talk's super-fast nationwide 5G network. And as a veteran-led company that cares about giving back to those who serve, if you're active or former military or a first responder, you'll save an additional 20% every single month. The easiest way to free up cash flow is to reduce your monthly recurring bills. Start with cutting overpriced wireless and switching to my wireless company. Again, I've been using Pure Talk myself for years. Best coverage, best price. It's a company that actually likes us. Head on over to puretalk.com/Shapiro. Make the switch today in as little as 10 minutes. Again, talk, text, and data for just $20 a month. That's puretalk.com/Shapiro. You'll save an additional 50% off your very first month of coverage. Pure Talk is America's wireless company. puretalk.com/Shapiro. Best deal on the market. And again, you save an additional 50% off your very first month of coverage. puretalk.com/Shapiro. Also, the American dream has always been about building something of your own, taking an idea, some hard work, turning it into a thriving business that you can call your own. For generations, entrepreneurship has been the cornerstone of that dream, but getting started used to mean huge upfront costs, technical headaches, a mountain of obstacles before you could even open your doors. That's where our sponsor, Shopify, comes in. It's the tool that puts the American dream within reach for anyone ready to chase it. Shopify is the commerce platform powering millions of businesses worldwide, including 10% of all U.S. e-commerce, and even our own Daily Wire shop. The best part? You're not going to need to be a web designer to get started. They've got beautiful, ready-to-go templates that match your brand right out of the box. Or, if you need some extra help along the way, their AI tools can handle everyday tasks like enhancing product images, writing product descriptions, and generating discount codes. If you're worried about getting your brand out there, Shopify makes it simple to run email and social media campaigns that actually reach customers. Plus, if you ever get stuck, their award-winning 24/7 customer support is always there to help you figure things out. This year, turn those dreams into and give them the best shot at success with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/Shapiro. Go to shopify.com/Shapiro. That's shopify.com/Shapiro. So again, we're going to go through the tape in just a moment. What happened is that on Saturday morning, Alex Preddy appeared to come to the aid of a person who'd been pushed to the ground by immigration agents. So there were a couple of people who were out there filming the immigration agents while they were attempting to effectuate some sort of arrest, apparently obstructing traffic. The immigration agents come over. There are two people there. One is Preddy. The other is a woman. The woman seems to be pushed to the ground. Preddy then appears to move toward her. An officer sprays Preddy in the face before dragging him to the ground. And then there are multiple officers who are surrounding Preddy. At some point, it appears that the agents believe that Preddy has a gun or is going for a gun or both. And they open fire on him, and he is shot 10 times, and he dies. That is the cleanest way of describing the circumstance. And as we'll see, it then turned into our usual political Rorschach test, in which the left proclaimed that it was a case of pure murder. And some members of the federal government, in my opinion, were not honest about what happened on the ground and told a story that does not seem to match up with the tape. Now, again, there will be full investigations of all. There should be full investigations. And anybody who's claiming there should not be, of course there should be. There should always be full investigations. Not because I believe the officers are guilty of murder or manslaughter. There should be a full investigation because I believe that it will exonerate the officers. And even if it didn't exonerate the officers, you need the full investigation in order to ensure that there's continued trust in law enforcement. Those full investigations should go forward. They should be perfectly objective. They should not be railroadings, as we've seen in the past with, say, Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. They should not be adjudicated in the media. That's why the best response from everybody, from the federal government to Walz to Fry, it should always be the same. There will be a full, thorough investigation. And at the end of the day, the law enforcement apparatus will take stock of what has happened and all the facts will be made available to you. That is what the response should always be, that on all sides, because that is the only way that we end up with the impartial administration of the law. That is the only way that happens. Unfortunately, that never happens. So we are now left with the tape. So we're going to go through the tape, and then I want to get into why it is, again, the biggest issue is why this stuff keeps happening in the first place. And no, it is not just a matter of individual incidents that are randomly cropping up. This is not random. It is happening in a specific city, at a specific time, in a specific place, for a reason. It is being driven deliberately. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. It is being deliberately driven by members of the Democratic higher echelons. It is being specifically driven by the legacy media. You are not seeing it. I will say it again. You are not seeing this in red areas. And more deportations are being carried out in those areas than in the blue areas. That is just a statistical fact. More deportations are taking place in Texas and Florida than are taking place in Minneapolis. But all the tape you're seeing is from Minneapolis. And there's a reason for that, because when you spur people to confrontation, especially confrontation with federal law enforcement, bad things happen. Okay, so here is the first angle. We have several angles here. Here is angle number one of the incident involving Alex Preddy. Okay, so you can see now that this is the end of the incident. Preddy is being wrestled to the ground. He's resisting. Okay, stop it right there for a second. First of all, don't resist federal law enforcement. That is a crime. Do not do it. Do not obstruct federal law enforcement and do not resist arrest. Don't do that thing. So they're wrestling Alex Preddy to the ground. Again, this is the tail end. Okay, it's sort of a third-person faraway shot across a couple of cars. And as you can see, he appears to be on the ground. The angle isn't particularly good. You just see a bunch of people on top of him. Okay, they're on top of him. They're wrestling him to the ground, trying to subdue him. It looks like 5 federal agents on top of him and one walking in the background and a couple more nearby. One appears to be punching him. Right, and then shots are fired and he's dead. And multiple shots afterward. Somebody seems to be filming this from inside a nearby building, maybe a cafe or something. Okay, so that is angle number 1. Again, very difficult to see what Preddy is doing on the ground. And sure, there can be circumstances in which somebody on the ground surrounded by officers is still a threat to the officers. Remember, the legal standard here is that a reasonable officer must believe that there is an imminent threat of grave bodily harm. That is the legal standard here. Now, could that happen with a person who is being piled on by multiple? Sure. Let's say, for example, the person has a gun and the person goes for the gun. Or let's say that the officer believes that the person has a gun for some good reason, like the person has a gun. And then the person doesn't have the gun, which may in fact be the case, but the officer still believes he has the gun. And so an accident happens where the officer believes a thing that isn't true, but in the moment, it's absolutely credible that the thing could be true. Now, you see this sort of circumstance where somebody goes for their waistband. And earlier, they've been identified as having a gun. And in their waistband isn't the gun, it's something else, and they get shot. Right? Officers have to make these decisions in the moment. That is the reality of the law enforcement job, is you have to make that decision right there in the moment. Okay, so that's angle number 1. Angle number 2, this angle is a lot closer up. This is, if the first angle was sort of from far away, here you can see the woman gets pushed to the ground. And Preddy puts up his hand. He's holding his cell phone in one hand. They spray him with some pepper spray. Okay, and then they wrestle him to the ground. He seems to be trying to still get this woman up. Multiple officers wrestle him to the ground. They're on top of him. Okay, and then he's now surrounded. You can see the officers still surrounding him. Somebody's blowing a whistle. Obviously, there are multiple protesters nearby. There's another woman who's attempting to resist arrest, it appears. And then you hear one shot and then multiple shots. A lot of shots, right? And then Alex Preddy dead on the ground. Okay, so again, when this stuff happens in the moment, very difficult to tell what's happening in the scrum. Okay, here's angle number 3. And this is the one where it looks as though Alex Preddy was disarmed before the shot. Okay, so you can see this one is, kind of closer on his face. Okay, they bring him to the ground. So they get him down to the ground. Wrestling him to the ground. Multiple whistles going off, obviously. Big crowd around him. Now, you can see his waist in this particular angle, Alex Preddy. And you can see one officer reaching in, and walking away with what looks like the gun. And then multiple shots going off. Again, very difficult to tell, just from looking at these tapes, what exactly is going on. Here's the slow motion tracking the man's gun. Okay, so, as you can see, here is one officer. He reaches for Preddy. He reaches to Preddy's waist. He does not have anything in his hand. Right? You can see it's frozen. He doesn't have anything to say. He reaches in. He walks away. He's going to stand up in a second, this officer. And there's going to be a gun in his hand. And you can see he's sort of wrestling with Preddy. He's on his back there. In a moment, it's going to freeze, and you can see the gun is now in his hand. That's what it appears to be in this tape. And then he walks away, and he clearly has a gun in his hand. Okay, and then, as he is running away, you can see there's the gun in his hand. So at this point, Alex Preddy does not have a gun on him. One of the agents withdraws a gun. You can see the agent withdraw the gun from his waistband there, and then start shooting. Now, it is quite possible, the New York Post is reporting, that the gun that was taken away from Preddy misfired. It's a SIG. That SIG apparently has a record sometimes of misfiring, going off accidentally. And it's possible that the gun went off accidentally, and that's what triggered the officers to start shooting. They hear a shot. They know that he had a gun on him. They don't know that the gun has been removed because it's difficult to see. And so they shoot him to death. Okay, in the immediate aftermath, ICE agents were trying to get emergency medical services. Obviously, people were yelling at them and screaming at them, which is sort of the usual in situations like this, unfortunately. You can see EMS is there. People screaming at them. And these are the circumstances, obviously, under which ICE and Border Patrol are having to work. Now, it is important to recognize here that Border Patrol, it was a Border Patrol agent apparently who shot him. These are Border Patrol officers. The reason Border Patrol is even in Minneapolis is because of the resistance to ICE. Normally, internal immigration enforcement is not done by Border Patrol. It is done by ICE. When there is significant resistance on the ground, that's when ICE might call in extra help from Border Patrol. Then the scene of the shooting was blocked off by the protesters, and you can see they basically decide they're going to block off the area, set up their own autonomous zone, essentially. Okay, this sort of activity is likely to result in more violence. This is likely to result in more violence. Valorizing people who get in the way of law enforcement while they're attempting to do their job is likely to result in more violence. Stop blocking ICE from doing its job. Stop resisting arrest. If you do resist arrest while you have a gun on you, there's a much higher likelihood that the police are going to perceive you as a threat of physical violence. And that's not a question of a normal protester carrying a gun, as we'll get to in a bit. That is a question of don't resist arrest while obstructing a federal law enforcement operation while carrying a gun. Put all those things together, and that is going to make your risk significantly higher than it otherwise would be. Get to more on this in just 1 second. First, for me, sleep is really, really important because if my brain is not working properly, and that's what happens when I don't sleep, well, the show just isn't as good. I'm not there for my family. Well, that's why I rely on Helix Sleep, and I have for years. Finding the right mattress doesn't have to be complicated. Our sponsor, Helix, actually makes it super straightforward with their sleep quiz, which matches you to the perfect mattress based on your specific preferences and sleep needs. They're not just another mattress company either. Helix is the most awarded mattress brand out there, with glowing reviews from major publications like Forbes and Wired. Folks, it's not just marketing hype. A study they conducted found that 82% of participants actually saw an increase in their deep sleep cycle while sleeping on a Helix mattress, which is pretty impressive when you think about how crucial quality sleep is for everything else in life. Helix Sleep means that, again, I'm getting better sleep. I've got that firm but breathable mattress. That's what I need. Got some for my kids. They're fantastic. They even offer free shipping straight to your door, a 120-night sleep trial so you can actually test it out in your own home. They back everything up with that limited lifetime warranty. Start sleeping right tonight by ordering a Helix mattress today. Head on over to helixsleep.com/Ben. Get 20% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/Ben for 20% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name after checkout so they know we sent you. That's helixsleep.com/Ben. And well, the protesters then gathered to talk about how they want to shut ICE down, which of course is their goal. Okay, there's open coordination, by the way, happening via Signal in Minneapolis between all of these protesters. And when we say protesters, very often we mean people who are legitimately stopping law enforcement from doing their jobs. According to Cam Higbee reporting on all of this, there are 754 members in one of these chats. The capacity is about 1,000 each day at midday. New people cycle in for their shift. There are a bunch of different chats for different zones of Minnesota. They coordinate on where to go, how to obstruct operations. They have what they call patrol zones in order to ensure that there are people there every time ICE shows up to effectuate some sort of arrest. Protesters are coordinating on their own dispatch calls, by the way. That is a thing they're doing. They go online and they tell people when they discover a vehicle, and then they have documentation, right, going on. The documentation is not obviously for some sort of prosecution. The documentation is happening very often in real time in order to get protesters to the place where ICE is doing the thing, in order to get, in many cases, lawbreakers obstructing law enforcement. Again, Cam Higbee doing some excellent reporting over there. Some of the people who've been participating in this include, for example, Minnesota State Representative Alex Falconer, who's coordinating Signal groups. Here is this state legislator involved in coordinating this.
We've got a couple groups on the app Signal that we would love for you to join. Whether or not you want to be a part of the resistance network, I fully understand that you may not be comfortable with that, but you can help us in a lot of ways by sending an alert that if you see any suspicious vehicles, any traffic, if you know of anybody that is being targeted, that's being detained, we have resources immediately available that we can send to you, send to their family, get them legal help, help the families if they need food, if people are afraid to leave their homes to get food. We're working with the food shelves to try to figure out a way to deliver groceries. I know yesterday apartment complexes needed their parking lots plowed and people were being taken as they were moving their cars. We can move your car for you. Just please, like anything, small, large, we are here for you. And we will stand with you. We will stand for you.
Okay, these are these state legislators who are going out of their way now to facilitate all of this. And they're not just facilitating protests. Let's be clear. If you know that these protesters are getting involved in the obstruction of federal law enforcement efforts, if you know that's happening, then encouraging that is not a good thing to do. And we know that there's been violence, obviously, against a wide variety of ICE officers. We've talked about the shooting of ICE officers or the attempted ramming of ICE officers. We've talked about the fact that actually on Saturday afternoon, there's a picture released by DHS showing the bloody stump of a finger of one of the ICE officers. Apparently, protesters are now biting the fingers off of federal officers in some cases. Tricia McLaughlin said that this person is going to lose his finger. That chunk of his finger was then shown in a jar by DHS. Meanwhile, in the immediate aftermath of all of this happening in Minneapolis, according to the New York Post, anti-ICE protesters violently swarmed a Minneapolis hotel where they believed federal officers were staying, hurling items at people inside, smashing its windows, and graffitiing F-ICE across the building's facade on Sunday. The large mob descended on the Home 2 Suites by Hilton Hotel late on Sunday as tensions gripped the Twin Cities one day after the killing of Alex Preddy. Apparently, they shoved and hurled objects at a Minneapolis Police Department officer and others just inside the hotel's lobby and attempted to push their way in, forcing those inside to use two large vending machines to physically block the rowdy demonstrators. The protesters also banged on trash cans, slammed snow shovels, blew whistles, stomped, yelled, shone strobe lights on the hotel's facade in an attempt to disturb the federal officers who they believed were sleeping inside. This sort of activity is being facilitated by politicians of the left. It is that clear. And that is the reason this is happening in Minneapolis and nowhere else. Why is this not happening, again, in New Orleans? Why is this not happening in Dallas, Texas? Why isn't this happening in red areas? The answer is very obvious. Tim Walz, who's been absolutely abhorrent throughout this entire debacle, a terrible governor, a disgrace to the country. This person was nominated for vice president of the United States by the Democratic Party. Walz put out a series of tweets, quote, "I just spoke with the White House after another horrific shooting by federal agents this morning. Minnesota has had it. This is sickening. The president must end this operation, pull the thousands of violent, untrained officers out of Minnesota now." So I guess the basic idea here is that you won't help by actively facilitating the deportation of criminal illegal immigrants. And thus, you're going to facilitate the obstruction of law enforcement. And then when things go bad, you're going to tell federal law enforcement to pull out. So it's state and local nullification is what we are talking about right now. And then he says, they think they can provoke us into abandoning our values. They are wrong. We will keep the peace. We will secure justice for our neighbors, and we will see this occupation end. How have you been doing keeping the peace? How's that going for you, Tim Walz? It seems like not so peaceful over there. It seems like every time you say the protesters are doing something wonderful in the aftermath of somebody being shot or in the aftermath of violent demonstrations, it gets worse. I don't think Tim Walz is interested in keeping things peaceful in Minnesota. I don't. I see very little evidence that he is. He can say it over and over, but I see very little evidence that this is his goal. He says, Minnesota believes in law and order. We believe in peace. And we believe that Trump needs to pull his 3,000 untrained agents out of Minnesota before they kill another American in the street. Not sure what he means by untrained. These agents go through training. But again, the goal is to proclaim this a Gestapo-like occupation. And again, Walz is building an entire permission structure for violence against officers. That's what he's doing. Here he was over the weekend saying we should not call these people law enforcement.
Do I have any confidence Donald Trump will do the right thing? No, I don't have a lot of confidence Donald Trump will do the right thing. I do have a lot of confidence that the majority of the American people will do the right thing. And I think there cannot be very many people across this country looking right now, after all the reporting that's been done, after everything that's been said under the pretense that they are here about immigration reform, and quit referring to these people as law enforcement. They are not law enforcement. We have law enforcement who do an incredible job. And to listen to Greg Bovino denigrate the work of our people who are out there cleaning up their mess, no, I don't have a lot of confidence that he himself will do it. But here's what I do have confidence in. There's a whole lot of Republicans, for whatever reason, cannot find their spine but they might find the ability to know that they're not going to win another election as long as they live unless they stand up for what's right and stand up for the rule of law and stand up for human decency, and that's the moment.
Okay, they're literally not standing up for the rule of law, Tim Walz and company. He is literally saying, get your agents out of here while they enforce federal law. And when he says things like they're not law enforcement, what do you think he is saying to protesters? What do you think he's saying? When he says they're not law enforcement, he's saying, okay, well, if they're not, then what are they? Then I guess they're terrorists? Then I guess that they are lawbreakers because they're wandering around committing crimes against other American citizens? What is he saying? He is granting a permission structure for all of this. Then Walz went on to say that Minnesotans are actually just, all they're doing is creating a log of evidence for prosecution of ICE agents. What's the problem with them creating a log of evidence? Is that really what you think they're doing? Creating a log of evidence? That's really all they're doing. They're not obstructing law enforcement.
Minnesotans are witnessing, and we're creating a log of evidence for the future prosecution of ICE agents and officials responsible for this. They're helping their neighbors. They're walking their kids to school. They're feeding families.
Okay, I'm confused. They're not doing. Alex Petty was not walking kids to school or feeding families. He was in the street. He was blocking traffic, apparently. You can see in the tape. He's out there. He's getting in the way of federal law enforcement. I mean, he was resisting arrest. Like, those are things that are happening. This is why I say that very often these things become a Rorschach test. And the sides are seeing completely different stories, and none of them seem to be related to the actual tape that we saw, in which life is messy and life is complicated. But it appears that Alex Petty was obstructing federal law enforcement in performance of an operation and then resisting arrest and had a gun on him. And then it appears from the tape that he was disarmed and someone mistakenly thought he was still armed and they heard a shot go off or something like that, and then they shot him. That appears to be the most objective way of describing the situation, but according to Tim Walz, it's just a pure, unprecedented, premeditated murder. Walz went on, by the way, to compare illegal immigrant children in Minnesota to Anne Frank. No, I'm sorry. Wrong. Anne Frank was not attempting to immigrate to the country from which she was deported. Anne Frank was a citizen of the country in which she lived, and then she was sent to Auschwitz, where she died of typhus. That is not the same thing. And guess what? American law enforcement agents, ICE officers, Border Patrol agents, are not Nazis. They are not the Gestapo. This is a purposefully driven chaos operation pushed by Democrats for political purposes.
We have got children in Minnesota hiding in their houses, afraid to go outside. Many of us grew up reading that story of Anne Frank. Somebody's going to write that children's story about Minnesota. And there's one person who can end this now.
Either he's stupid or he's venal or both. Probably both. And again, he's been setting the groundwork for this for weeks and months. On January 7th, Walz said, "It is your patriotic duty to resist." Here he was.
I want Minnesotans to hear this from me. The desire to get out and protest and to speak up to this administration of how wrong this is, that is a patriotic duty at this point in time.
It is a patriotic duty. Last week, he suggested it was time to, quote unquote, cause good trouble. And that, well, then trouble is going to ensue. I mean, that is a thing that is likely going to happen.
These are the moments for people to stand up. These are the moments that are not the easy ones, but these are the moments where character comes out. I am receiving notes from around the world. People identifying, and there's a lot of people saying, okay, I was sleeping on Minnesota. And I think what you've done and what our neighbors are going through to see this, and I oftentimes told this story, I served on the China Commission in Congress, ironically enough, as co-chair with Marco Rubio. We used to bring in Chinese political prisoners, and we would ask them, when we speak up and call out your government, is it bad? And they said, well, in the short run, it's bad because they torture us. But if you don't speak up, they will torture us and forget about us. And the idea is right now is we have to be speaking up. We have to call it out. You are doing everything, and our neighbors are doing everything. And I can't stress enough on this. We're winning it because we're doing it with Minnesota grit, Minnesota humor, Minnesota decency. oftentimes talk about this, and I know people are discussing this a lot. I spent a lot of time with John Lewis on nonviolent resistance. The resistance matters. We're not telling people to be silent, but we're not telling people to go out and cause problems. We're going to cause good trouble.
Okay, so when he talks about nonviolent resistance, what does it mean when people violently resist arrest, for example? Is that nonviolent resistance? Because that's what we've been seeing. Is it nonviolent resistance when you block traffic like Renee Good did and then hit an officer with your car? Is that nonviolent resistance? What does he mean by this? And again, the lines are pretty blurry here, and they're being deliberately blurred. Meanwhile, Jacob Fry, who is the awful mayor of Minneapolis, he put out a statement, quote, after today's shooting, Minneapolis is filing a declaration to push for an immediate ruling on our temporary restraining order. We need swift action to protect our city. I have formally requested National Guard assistance to support our 600 Minneapolis police officers. I've been clear for weeks. This situation is unsustainable. Our community is tired. Our officers are tired. Our businesses are tired. Our top priority is safety, and this will help. So I'm confused. Is he trying to call on the National Guard to stop ICE from doing its job or to stop people from rioting? Which is it? Because that makes an awful big difference. If it is the former, that he's trying to stop ICE from doing its job by calling in the National Guard, then you have like an actual insurrection on your hands. You can't have state law enforcement opposed to federal law enforcement. That does not have a good history in this country or any other, so far as I'm aware. Meanwhile, Fry said he did a presser, an overwrought presser in which he said, how many more Americans need to die? You know what would stop Americans from dying? Tell people to go home while ICE does its job. That would get people to stop dying. It would. Tell people to not obstruct ICE officers.
I just saw a video of more than 6 masked agents pummeling one of our constituents and shooting him to death. How many more residents, how many more Americans need to die or get badly hurt for this operation to end? How many more lives need to be lost before this administration realizes that a political and partisan narrative is not as important as American values? How many times must local and national leaders must plead with you, Donald Trump, to end this operation and recognize that this is not creating safety in our city?
Well, what's not creating safety is, again, people obstructing federal law enforcement. You don't create safety deporting criminal illegal immigrants. That creates safety, unless you decide you're going to get in the way of law enforcement, in which case safety does not ensue. This is a chaos operation. It's a chaos operation, and it's being promoted by everybody up to and including Barack Obama, the former president of the United States, who thus far I've seen no comments on his Twitter feed with regard to the murder apparently of tens of thousands of people in Iran, but he definitely has some statements about our Border Patrol and ICE agents. Quote, the killing of Alex Preddy is a heartbreaking tragedy. It should also be a wake-up call to every American, regardless of party, that many of our core values as a nation are increasingly under assault. For weeks now, people across the country have been rightly outraged by the spectacle of masked ICE recruits and other federal agents acting with impunity and engaging in tactics that seem designed to intimidate, harass, provoke, and endanger the residents of a major American city. These unprecedented tactics have now resulted in the fatal shooting of 2 U.S. citizens. Again, that is not true. That is a lie. The idea that ICE pursuing its law enforcement duties is the thing that has resulted in the fatal shootings of 2 U.S. citizens is wrong. People walking down the streets not bothering ICE are not getting shot. People obstructing ICE operations and then getting into disputed altercations with ICE officers, sometimes well armed. That is the thing that is going to end with bad things happening, clearly. Obviously, the local officials have had their perspective on this as well, and they are mirroring the Democratic line. The Minneapolis police chief was out there. His name is Brian O'Hara, denouncing the ICE operations and what happened with Alex Preddy.
Well, I've seen the videos just as thousands of people around the country have, and the videos speak for themselves. I think it's deeply concerning, the things that are being said. This is an individual that was a city resident. It appears that he was present, exercising his First Amendment rights to record law enforcement activity, and also exercising his Second Amendment rights to lawfully be armed in a public space in the city. So I think very obviously there are serious questions that are being raised. And I think the greater issue is, even if there is an investigation that ultimately proves that at the time of the there's legally justified, I don't think that even matters at this point, because there's there is so much outrage and concern around what is happening in the city.
Okay, that last statement is insane. That last statement is totally insane. That if there's a full investigation and it finds that the shooting was justified, that doesn't matter. That's the only thing that should matter, shouldn't it? Not? I mean, like, as a country where law is supposed to prevail, the impartial administration of justice is supposed to prevail, shouldn't the guilt or innocence of the officers at issue be the key issue? But this is always the case with people who are promoting the left-wing narrative. The narrative matters more than the facts. It doesn't matter what actually happened. It only matters what you think happened and what people feel about what happened. Really, truly ugly stuff, particularly from a member of law enforcement. Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. She's also trying to stump on the space as she, of course, wants to run for governor of Minnesota in the wake of Tim Walz announcing he will not run for a third term. So here she was saying, silence is complicity.
I am strongly opposed to more funding for ICE. I was strongly opposed when they tripled their budget this summer, $75 billion more. That money could go to local law enforcement. And instead, they loosened all the training requirements down from months to 47 days. They are violating the Fourth Amendment, that they are ramming in people's doors without a judicial warrant. They are refusing to have mandatory body cameras. They have clearly a leadership that should be removed. You can just go down the list of all the problems with this right now. And I really do appreciate that Senator Cassidy was brave enough to stand up and say something about it when no one else will. And in this point, silence is complicity.
Silence is complicit in what? What kind of silence are we talking about? What if we agree this is a tragic situation and that there should be a full investigation, but also believe that Democrats are operating under the guise of a chaos-driven mentality? Gavin Newsom, who wants to run for president, is now suggesting that this is a police state. He put this up his press office, a press office he has denounced before when I interviewed him or was on his show. So technically he was interviewing me. He put out a statement via his press office. You're seeing what's happening on American streets. This is a police state. Speak up, show up, use your rights peacefully. Again, promoting this sort of stuff. It is not a police state. Okay, people are not being simply randomly arrested on the streets for doing nothing. That is not what's happening. Mikey Sherrill, the new governor of New Jersey, suggested that ICE is a Stasi force. That would be a reference to the secret police in East Germany.
This isn't about sanctuary, not sanctuary cities. This goes far beyond that. This is about a basically Stasi-type force of secret police that wear masks, that are unidentifiable, that are unaccountable, that have leadership in the Trump administration blatantly lying about what's going on when the American people can see the videos about exactly what's happening. There is no police officer in the state of New Jersey that would A, act like that, because we have training that far surpasses any type of misconduct like that, or B, should anything untoward happen, the other agents with that police officer would stop that immediately, and that person would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, which is exactly what needs to happen with these ICE agents in Minneapolis.
Like, they're the Stasi now. So Democrats on the back of this are threatening another government shutdown. According to the New York Times, bipartisan legislation to fund a broad swath of the government and avert a shutdown at the end of the week appeared to be in grave danger on Saturday as key Senate Democrats vowed to oppose it after federal agents shot and killed a Minneapolis resident. The rapidly escalating opposition to the measure, which includes $64.4 billion for the Department of Homeland Security, including $10 billion for ICE, amplified the likelihood of a partial government shutdown at the end of the month. The legislation requires the support of Democrats to muster the 60 votes needed to avoid the filibuster and advance in the Senate. So Schumer wants the DHS funding bill to be cut out of the broader appropriations bill in an attempt to then have a debate over ICE and yell at the Trump administration over ICE operations. So they're apparently willing to hold up the funding of the government again in order to go after DHS. Not a surprise. Senator Angus King, an independent who caucuses with the Democrats from Maine, he is calling for a government shutdown, essentially.
Margaret, I hate shutdowns. I'm one of the people that helped negotiate the solution to the end of the last shutdown, but I can't vote for a bill that includes ICE funding under these circumstances. What they're doing in my state, what we saw yesterday in Minneapolis, there's an easy way out, by the way. Leader Thune could separate, which is what they did in the House, separate the 5 other appropriation bills, put them on the floor. They would pass, I think, overwhelmingly. Then let's take up DHS. And by the way, if those bills pass, 96% of the federal government is funded. Yeah. Take up DHS by itself. Let's have an honest negotiation, put some guardrails on what's going on, some accountability, and that would solve this problem. We don't have to have a shutdown.
Okay, we don't have to have a shutdown, but he wants a shutdown. So glad to see the Democrats are, again, pushing forward with this narrative. One of the things that we are seeing from the left is an attempt to import the sort of left-wing, bizarre ideological kinship with terror groups abroad to what's happening in places like Minneapolis. Apparently, resistance to law enforcement, to legitimate law enforcement, is now to be considered virtue. And if you can create enough quote-unquote atrocity stories, then you can undermine the enforcement of the law. That seems to be the model of people like the disreputable Hassan Piker, who literally put out a tweet claiming, quote, the siege on Minneapolis is where you really see the West Bank occupation tactics on U.S. soil. Constant militarized ICE presence on the streets, illegal detentions, killing people, trying to defend their neighbors, labeling them terrorists. Fascism is colonialism turned inward. It's here. Again, it is this ideology that has now been translated into the anti-ICE operations that are being performed by groups like this. And you have morons like Thomas Friedman, who spends all day at the New York Times. He just goes to various countries and listens to taxi drivers and then thinks he has some sort of insight on the world. He wrote a column today in which he claimed that ICE officers and Hamas militiamen are the same. Because, quote, if you placed a photo of an ICE officer next to a Hamas militiaman in a news quiz, I would defy you to tell them apart. So basically, if people wear masks, they must all be the same. That's the idea from genius Thomas Friedman. Genius level stuff. Okay. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is responding. Vice President J.D. Vance tweeted out something that is clearly true. He said, this level of engineered chaos is unique to Minneapolis. It is the direct consequence of far-left agitators working with local authorities. Obviously, that's right. The president put out a statement as well. Quote, this is the gunman's gun, loaded with 2 additional full magazines and ready to go. What is that all about? Where are the local police? Why weren't they allowed to protect ICE officers? The mayor and the governor called them off. It is stated that many of these police were not allowed to do their job, that ICE had to protect themselves. Not an easy thing to do. Why does Ilhan Omar have $34 million in her account? And where are the tens of billions of dollars that have been stolen from the once great state of Minnesota? We are there because of massive monetary fraud with billions of dollars missing and illegal criminals that were allowed to infiltrate the state through the Democrats' open border policy. We want the money back, and we want it back now. Those fraudsters who stole the money are going to jail where they belong. This is no different from a really big bank robbery. Much of what you're witnessing is a cover-up for this theft and fraud. The mayor and governor are inciting insurrection with their pompous, dangerous, and arrogant rhetoric. Instead, these sanctimonious political fools should be looking for the billions of dollars that have been stolen from the people of Minnesota and the United States of America. Let our ICE patriots do their job. 12,000 illegal alien criminals, many of them violent, have been arrested and taken out of Minnesota. If they were still there, you would see something far worse than you are witnessing today. Because that is President Trump's response to all this. And then President Trump suggested that he would be sending Tom Homan as well, the head of his border czar. He said, quote, I'm sending Tom Homan to Minnesota tonight. He has not been involved in that area, but knows and likes many of the people there. Tom is tough but fair and will report directly to me. Separately, a major investigation is going on with respect to the massive $20 billion plus welfare fraud that has taken place in Minnesota. Okay, that is a good move, sending Tom Homan. Homan is a responsible actor. And this brings us to other members of the Trump administration who make statements about disputed incidents like the death of Alex Preddy that are not tied to the videos that we can all see or what appear to be the facts on the ground. We saw this with Renee Good when Kristi Noem, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, suggested that she was attempting to mow down officers with her car. At the very least, that particular narrative did not seem to be supported by the video. In this particular case, Kristi Noem, as this was all unfolding, came out and made a statement in which she suggested that Alex Preddy was a domestic terrorist who wanted to inflict maximum damage.
This looks like a situation where an individual arrived at this scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals and to kill law enforcement. About hundreds of protesters then showed up at the scene. They began to obstruct and to assault law enforcement officers. We saw objects being thrown at them, including ice and other objects, and a rampant assault began, and even an HSI officer agent's finger was bitten off. Crowd control measures were deployed to bring safety to the public and to law enforcement at the scene. And once again, I want to remind everybody that this situation and this tragedy did not have to happen. Our law enforcement are doing everything that they can to protect the public. We're praying for this deceased loved one's family and friends, but we also recognize that the Minnesota governor and the Minneapolis mayor need to take a long, hard look in the mirror.
Okay, this is not connected to the video that you saw. I'm sorry it isn't. The idea that Kristi Noem said this guy's a domestic terrorist who wanted to inflict maximum damage, that at the very least he wanted to kill law enforcement. Let's just say that that is a matter under dispute. He's standing there with a cell phone. He is filming people when this whole thing begins. If he wanted to kill law enforcement, presumably his gun would have been drawn at the very beginning. You're allowed to protest while holding a gun. We'll get to that in a moment. Now, the best case for Kristi Noem is that it is possible that he reached for what at that point was an empty holster. It is unclear from the tape whether that is the case or not, or whether that triggered the shooting. We don't know yet. But she was grilled on this characterization of events by Peter Doocy, because from the tape, it appears that Preddy had already been disarmed.
You said last night, it looks like a situation where an individual arrived at the scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals and to kill law enforcement. Did he say, I'm going to kill you, or did he leave a note? How do you know that was his intent?
You know, part of this investigation will be hearing from those agents and officers and people on the ground. But we do know that he came to that scene and impeded a law enforcement operation, which is against federal law. It's a felony. When he did that, interacting with those agents, when they tried to get him to disengage, he became aggressive and resisted them throughout that process. These officers used their training, followed their protocols, and were in fear of their lives and the people around them. And that's how this tragedy unfolded, and we hope we never see it again.
It appears that Alex Preddy was disarmed. If he was disarmed, is it the protocol to use deadly force?
And that's all part of this investigation. Every video will be analyzed. Everything will be looked at. And that's part of the answers that I can't speak to every single thing that those officers thought, but this happened in seconds. They clearly feared for their lives and took action to defend themselves and the people around them.
Okay, so this is the part you should have been saying in the first place. Why is it the first iteration is he's a domestic terrorist who is trying to murder everybody, and then the second iteration is the reasonable one? The first iteration should be the reasonable one. Why does that matter? Because if you are going to appear, if you want this operation to be successful, if you want ICE to have the trust of the American people, then when things happen, you have to say a full investigation will take place. These matters obviously are incredibly fraught. Resisting arrest, obstructing federal investigations and federal law enforcement is a crime. Do not do this to police officers. Do not do this to federal law enforcement. Don't do it. They have to make snap judgments in a heartbeat. Bad things could happen. A full investigation is taking, that should be the original comment, not he's a domestic terrorist and he was obviously attempting to murder as many people as possible. When you say that sort of stuff, it means that people, number one, aren't going to trust your investigation. And number two, they are not going to trust you anymore because you have said something that does not appear to be supported by the tape. Greg Bovino is one of the leaders of Border Patrol. Again, it was a Border Patrol agent who apparently was involved in the shooting. And here he was explaining the incident.
During this operation, an individual approached U.S. Border Patrol agents with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. The agents attempted to disarm the individual, but he violently resisted. Fearing for his life and the lives and safety of fellow officers, a Border Patrol agent fired defensive shots. Medics on the scene immediately delivered medical aid to the subject, but the subject was pronounced dead at the scene. The suspect also had 2 loaded magazines and no accessible ID. This looks like a situation where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement.
Okay, so again, that last sentence is totally unnecessary. Why was this a situation where he wanted to inflict maximum damage and massacre law enforcement? If you look at that tape, it's very difficult for your eyes to tell you that. And so obviously this creates a gap between reality and the narrative that you are now being told. And that's bad. It undermines your credibility. It undermines the credibility of law enforcement. Don't do this thing. Truly, if you want ICE to succeed, if you want Border Patrol to be able to perform its job, don't do this thing. Dana Bash at CNN went after Bovino for all of this.
Back to the Second Amendment, what you're saying about the Second Amendment is peacefully protesting with firearms. Absolutely, I've done that myself. and fully support that, but not when you perpetrate violence, obstruct, delay, or obfuscate Border Patrol in the performance of their duties in an
There is
active
no
crime
evidence that
scene.
he was perpetrating violence. And there's no evidence, unless you have it, and we'd love to see it if there is, that he was intending to massacre law enforcement, other than the fact that he was there and he had a gun lawfully.
He meant to be there beforehand. Again, Dana, he came there beforehand.
How do you know that?
For a reason.
How do you know that?
Because he was there.
But all he
Because
was doing
there.
was filming
It's
and
very
documenting
evident.
it, which is legal. He was carrying a gun, which in Minneapolis
I didn't
is
say
legal.
it wasn't. And I didn't say it wasn't legal.
So
but
then what did he do that was illegal?
Assault federal law enforcement when he does that. That's an active law enforcement crime
Where do you
scene
see in the video that
he
he was
decided to enter into?
Where do you see in the video that he was assaulting law enforcement? Because from everything we have seen, law enforcement was assaulting him when he was there trying to help another individual.
Dana, law enforcement doesn't assault anyone. Follow directions of law enforcement. Follow directions of law enforcement in an active crime scene.
Again, they're talking past each other. But the point is this. What he's saying in that tape with Dana Bash is much more justifiable than what he said. He doesn't have a defense to the idea that Preddy was there to commit a massacre. Because that doesn't appear, again, from the video to be the case. Now, maybe they can show extraneous evidence that is the case, but that's why you do an investigation. And that's why it is important. Again, you want to uphold your credibility. I would like for ICE to be able to do its job. The best way for ICE to do its job is to say, we follow the law. If you get in the way of us following the law, you will be arrested. It raises the risk of bad things happening to you if you get arrested while carrying a gun and resisting arrest. That's it. And there will be full investigations. But don't do it. Let us enforce the law. And now there's another line that was retailed by a couple of members of the administration that I think is the wrong line, suggesting that there is something wrong with protesting even with a gun. Now, again, be specific in your language. Don't resist law enforcement while carrying it. Don't resist law enforcement at all. And don't resist law enforcement while carrying a gun. It raises the risk that somebody is going to see you as a deadly threat because you're carrying a deadly weapon, obviously. That would be a normal thing to say. But when Kash Patel at the FBI says no one who wants to be peaceful shows up at a protest with a firearm, that obviously is not true.
But as Secretary Noem said, no one who wants to be peaceful shows up at a protest with a firearm that is loaded with 2 full magazines. That is not a peaceful protest, and you do not get to touch law enforcement. You do that anywhere, this FBI is going to be leading the charge to arrest those.
But how was he threatening Border Patrol? You've collected the evidence, you said, right? You have the handgun in your possession?
That's right.
And how was he using that handgun in terms of threatening Border Patrol? What was the threat? He had his camera, right? He was filming it.
That's something that I will let the DHS and the prosecutors, because they are the ones investigating that case. I don't want to stylize that evidence.
Again, that should have been the primary response from the beginning. We are going to look into it. There will be a full investigation. This is not difficult stuff. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, suggests, of course, that there is something wrong with going to a protest with a gun. This is not true. It's not true. I have a lot of friends who've gone to various protests while legally carrying firearms because that is legal in the United States.
I mean, as you know, he was an ICU nurse, worked for the Veterans Administration, and there's no evidence that he brandished the gun whatsoever. In fact, it appears that he was disarmed before
he brought a gun. Have you ever gone to a protest, Jonathan?
I mean, we do have a Second Amendment in this country that...
Jonathan, have you ever gone to a protest?
I mean...
have you gone to a protest?
I mean, no, actually, as a reporter covering it.
Okay, I've been to a protest. Yeah. Guess what? I didn't bring a gun. I brought a billboard.
Okay, no. Again, don't resist officers while carrying a gun. Don't resist officers at all. PR matters when you're in a PR war. Democrats have started a PR war and a violent, chaotic conflict in Minneapolis, to say the very least. Okay, so what should happen next? That's the big question. So there are some, James Comer, Republican, staunch Trump supporter, who suggests that maybe ICE should just pull out of Minneapolis, let them have at it.
If I were President Trump, I would almost think about, okay, if the mayor and the governor are going to put our ICE officials in harm's way, and there's a chance of losing more, innocent lives or whatever, then maybe go to another city and let the people of Minneapolis decide, do we want to continue to have all of these illegals? Are we going to allow our governor, attorney general, and mayor to get away with this? And I think the people of Minnesota would rebel against their leadership, because it's very clear that a majority of Americans want the criminal illegals apprehended, and that's what ICE is trying to do.
Okay, so again, he's not the only one who's calling for a sort of pause or moving away from Minneapolis. The Wall Street Journal editorial board suggests that President Trump would be wise to pause ICE enforcement in the Twin Cities to ease tensions and consider a less provocative strategy. They admit that the left would then conclude their civil disobedience is paid off. Okay, so here's the problem. It's a catch-22 for the Trump administration. Because if the Trump administration continues to pursue operations the way that they are currently going, there will be likely more of these incidents, because if people resist arrest and obstruct law enforcement, they are likely to meet with violent ends in some cases. At the same time, if you abandon the city, then the apparent notice has gone out that if you're a blue city or a blue state, you can simply repel federal law authority by sending a bunch of protesters in the streets to obstruct federal law enforcement and maybe get shot on camera. And you can't run a popsicle stand that way. You can't run a country that way. You can't enforce federal law that way. In my opinion, the President of the United States should invite Governor Walz to the White House and Jacob Fry, and he should sit them down and he should say, listen, we are focused solely on enforcing the law with regard to criminal, illegal immigrants. If you continue to obstruct that, we will continue to enforce the law, but federal money will go away for any projects to which we can legally remove that funding. You make suggestions on how we can better facilitate the removal of criminal, illegal immigrants. We're not going to stop enforcing the law because you activate protesters. We're not going to do it. It's up to you. You tell us how we solve this problem. And one option that is not on the table is refusal to enforce federal law. You tell us, what does that look like? Because you're not helping us. We would love your help. You say that your local law enforcement is better trained. Great. When they have an arrest and that person is a criminal, they should inform ICE about who is an illegal immigrant, and ICE can come pick them up. And that makes it a lot easier. You tell us, how do we solve the problem? But here's the precondition. The precondition is federal law will be enforced. And if you do not, if you get in the way of federal law enforcement, then whatever legal options we have are on the table to enforce federal law. Because again, this is a systemic problem. This is not merely a sort of one-off. If the goal here is, if the idea from now on is that anytime there is a federal law enforcement agency that attempts to pursue the law, that local protesters can create chaos and then drive federal law enforcement out of their state, then you have effectively state nullification of federal law. That really is the predicate to civil war. It is a giant fail. It should not happen. But we're all ears. If Governor Walz and Jacob Fry don't like the way that the law is being enforced in Minneapolis, show us how the law should be enforced in Minneapolis, short of it shouldn't be enforced at all. Because it shouldn't be enforced at all is not a legally tenable position or a morally tenable position. Alrighty, the show is continuing for our members right now. We have some pretty significant foreign policy updates. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.